bang the meeting to order.
Okay, just a reminder for the board. Just a reminder to the board, if you're not talking, leave your microphone off. But if you are talking, please turn it on. Okay?
Okay, it's 7:02. I call the February 4th, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting of Glencoe Park District to order. Lisa, please call the roll and note the time.
Great. It's 7:02. Commissioner Boren is absent. She has the flu. Commissioner Kobe?
Here.
Commissioner Schneider?
Here.
Commissioner Spector?
Here.
President Spain?
Here. It is our practice not to address questions at this time. However, we will take comments under advisement. We will have an opportunity for additional public comment regarding Milton Park after our presentation. Is there anyone here about to make a comment on anything other than Milton Park this evening?
Okay.
Okay.
By the way, welcome. We love to see people in the audience.
We
This is
love
great.
community involvement.
Welcome. Thank you for coming.
All right. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to kick it off. Kyle is going to give us a presentation, and then we're going to take public comment. Thank you for coming this evening.
Thanks. Here. All right. Thank you, President Spain. Good evening, everyone. Members of the public, thank you for joining us tonight. Appreciate the opportunity to present some information on Milton Park and Milton Park Playground. So back in November, during our capital improvement plan presentation, Milton Park was discussed briefly. The board directed staff to gather some more information and pull together another presentation, as well as garner community feedback on the topic in order to make a more well-informed decision. Staff prepared this presentation. We sent letters to 143 neighbors and posted signs on site at Milton Park, as well as posting on our website. So as usual, I will run through the presentation here. Stop me along the way for any questions or save them to the end, whichever way you prefer. And then I believe we will go into public comment, followed by board discussion. Can everyone hear me all right through the speakers? No? All right, thank you. I wonder if is the volume? I think the volume. I think we just have to make an adjustment on our volume setting. Thank you, Bobby. Is this any better? A little better? Better? Okay. All right. All the way up. Awesome. A little closer out, right here. All right, so starting off with just some facts regarding Milton Park. So Milton Park has had a playground in place since at least the mid-1980s. The current structure was actually relocated from Takeif to Milton Park in 2008. The current Milton Park playground is of timber form construction or wooden structure. Timber form is no longer a common construction material for commercial playgrounds. That's due to its shorter lifespan compared against metal structures. The playground at Milton Park is past its useful life per the Illinois Department of Natural Resources useful life criteria. IDNR assigns a 8 to 12 year lifespan for a timber form playground. The playground also does not currently meet ADA standards. Significant repairs have had to be made in recent years, including a slide footing replacement. And on our monthly inspections, we have to dig down below grade to inspect the timber form posts for post rot and deterioration. The picture on the screen depicts what we're seeing currently below grade at Milton Park. So with every inspection, we're inspecting the posts to see what their condition is. The risk being is if we come across one being beyond the point of safe or becoming dislodged, the park would then have to be decommissioned unplanned. So quick little information on our park inventory. So this previous year, we went through our comprehensive master plan, the consulting group 110%, along with Upland Design Group. Inventoried all our parks, categorized them by their different park categorizations. Milton Park is one of our 4 mini parks. What defines a mini park is a park that provides a walkable drop-in recreational opportunity, including things like playgrounds, picnic tables, and general seating. What we call the service area of our mini parks is essentially a 1/4 mile radius from the park without having to cross a service area boundary. Typically, a service area boundary is going to be a main road, a main artery, train tracks, trails, or neighboring community boundaries. Milton Park is the largest of our 4 mini parks at 1.6 acres. The other 3 mini parks are Astor Park, Old Elm, and Vernon Playground. In addition to the park's inventory, there is a level of service consideration to take into account. So the National Recreation and Park Association assigns service level recommendations for communities. In the case of mini parks, it's recommended that communities have 1/2 acre of mini park land for every 1,000 residents. So with Glencoe's roughly 9,000 population, the recommended acreage for mini parks in Glencoe is 4.42 acres. As it stands currently, we have 3.84 acres of mini park land, so we sit at a slight deficit of about 1/2 an acre. Just for context, if Milton Park were to be removed from our mini park inventory, that would further put us at a deficit to the tune of 2.1 acres. We did try to pull some data to kind of showcase how the park is used relative to our other mini parks. Unfortunately, we were only able to pull from Astor. Data from Old Elm and Vernon was not available. A couple just little caveats before we look into the numbers. We use Placer AI to track the number of visitors to our parks. The way Placer AI works is it's pulling data from cell phones. So what we want to kind of highlight here is that we believe that the number of visitors to Milton and Astor and really all our playground parks is probably significantly higher than what we're seeing because many of the users are going to be children without cell phones. So for every guardian, caretaker, parent that is there, we would assume there's probably 1 child, if not more. So just keeping that in mind as we look at the numbers, it's not an exact science, but just to kind of paint the picture of the way the park is used, we do think these numbers are a little bit higher. Just some data points that we kind of looked at to consider is both Milton, which is the orange depiction, and Astor, which is the gray, have seen relatively steady growth over the past 7 years in terms of visitors. Really at a similar trajectory when you kind of look at the path of the graphs. Astor Park was renovated. Its first full year post renovation was in 2018. We see that big spike in 2020 and 2021, likely due to COVID. One thing to note, we do see Astor kind of accelerated its number of visitors in that span. It's possible that was due to kind of that new park bump having been renovated. It's also possible that's related to neighborhood turnover or other circumstances. So just one thing to maybe consider in terms of the way the park was used. At both locations, we see a step back in 2022 and 2023. Again, speculating a bit post-COVID, people returning maybe to some of the pre-COVID activities they were doing, less time in the parks. Could also be due to weather patterns, neighborhood turnover, things of that nature. And then interestingly, we see a bump back at both locations this past year, returning to above their peak levels, particularly at Milton, even when we remove the goat visits. So the numbers that are up there for Milton in 2024 remove the 334 visitors that were tracked during the 2 weeks of goat visits. Even pulling those out, we did see a 76% increase over the average annual visitors at Milton and a 15% increase over its highest previous year, which was 2021. So again, a little anecdotal, the goats may have brought more eyes to the park and potentially brought more people to come back that maybe didn't know it was there, or their children found a new affinity for that park. In terms of replacement cost estimates, real quick, just kind of how we budget our construction budget number for this project. We look at our previous projects of playgrounds in similar footprints. We'll apply a 5% compounding annual growth rate to the costs at the time of construction to come up with what they would be in today's dollars. Astor would be $245,000 in today's dollars, $280,000 for Old Elm, and $300,000 for Lakefront Park. So staff feels that the $285,000 budget is the appropriate budget number, assuming the playground is replaced in a similar footprint with no major expansion or no significantly different types of elements. Mentioned earlier that we sent letters to 143 neighbors. This shows the parcels that received those letters falling within that quarter-mile service area radius, south, east, and west of Dundee Road. We also sent letters to the neighbors directly across the street from Dundee, just given their close proximity and visual sight lines into the park. We posted signs at all 3 entry points to the park, as well as emails, as well as information on our website. We did receive 15 emails or social media correspondences ahead of this meeting. Those were provided to the board, either in part of the board packet or ahead of tonight's meeting. And of those 15, we put together a quick summary of the content within them. So of those 15 letters that were received, 11 of them wanted to keep a playground in place. One of them wanted a new amenity. Two of them wanted it returned to a green space, and one had indifference to what was done there. So really what we're here tonight to discuss is kind of what direction the board thinks we should go forward after hearing public comment. Staff thinks there's kind of three options for consideration: replacing the playground with a new playground in a similar footprint, replacing the playground with a different passive recreational type of equipment, which could be things like a gazebo, benches, picnic tables, games tables, things like that. Option three being removing that playground and restoring the area to a native green space. If the board gives direction for either options 1 or 2, we will then engage with landscape architects to bring back some design options for future public input, board input, and ultimately moving forward on construction. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions from the board, or if opening up to public comment is where we're at.
Kyle, I'd like to, at this time, hear input from the public.
Sure.
So what we do for these comment periods is there's a limit of 3 minutes per person. So we'll have a timer just to be respectful of everybody's here. We want to give everyone an equal opportunity to speak. We take comments at this time. It's not really our practice to address kind of direct questions, but certainly once we can open it up afterward to Kyle for the board to ask questions about anything that arises during the public comment period. So with that, feel free to come up. And do people need to sign in before they
We already
signed in? So we're all good. All right.
Right. Get this. It's fine, I guess.
You've got me nervous about this timer, so I'll do my best. Thanks for including us. This is my first time at a Park District meeting. My name is Andy Holton. I'm one of the residents that lives at 873 Grove Street, directly adjacent to Milton Park. Again, thanks for the opportunity to be here. We're big fans of the Park District. We've lived in the property directly adjacent to the park for a little over 7 years. And we've really gotten the opportunity to love the space and get to know it, as well as kind of what happens around the neighborhood itself. I sent an email in a couple days ago, which you may have received, but I thought I would just share some of my thoughts here live, both to the board as well as to the community. So a few observations. One, it's a really unique forested green space. I think when you look at the different parks and learning about the mini park concept, Milton is really unique with the canopy of the trees, particularly in the density of the central part of Glencoe that it rests. Primary usage occasions are passed through on the walking trail, toddlers with caregivers, and then oftentimes we'll see people or couples just kind of having a moment, reading a book, doing nothing without a cell phone, and just enjoying the canopy of the trees around it. And I think that's something that's also really nice for toddlers and caregivers that come to the park, getting away from screens and just enjoying nature, again, and close to central Glencoe. A couple other observations is that where it's located by Dundee and Grove, you often get some high speed traffic of cars coming around the corner, coming off of Skokie and 41, as well as Dundee. There's something that really interesting that we have a map in our home that was from the 1930s of Chicago area. And there's an inset of the North Shore. And you can see clearly marked Milton Trail on this map from back in the 1930s. It's really, really unique. And we've been curious if there's any historical significance of the trail dating back to Glencoe and the history of the town. And I think there's just like this nice corollary between how much people are using the trail itself and the history of the space and the green space. In terms of recommendations and ideas, I don't think we should get rid of the green space. The forestry is something I think to be celebrated and maintained and recognized. So whether or not you go through option 1, option 2, option 3, and maybe you engage architects and design, really think about the idea of the forestry and the canopy and the green space and use that as an advantage and a creative lever. Some examples of how you might be able to do that. Obviously, we've talked about the playground, but you could also rebrand it Milton Trail, right? It's a place where people come to walk and enjoy the canopy in downtown Glencoe. Some examples of that, and I know I'm probably close on time. All right, thank you. I told you I'd be nervous. Thinking about that, you could limit the playground equipment, but introduce new features that better integrate with the environment. Some examples of that, an additional pass-through trail that actually connects the trail today to the sidewalk that's on Dundee. There are some really cool trails by South School that weave throughout the trees in a similar fashion. Another one, if you were to add the trails, there's some undulation in the property. You could put a little walking bridge where kids and caregivers could walk across, again, underneath the canopy of the trees. Woodlawn Park, there's almost like a zip line type thing. Imagine having that in the center of the forest where the kids and caregivers could walk into the trail, slide on this one feature, or have a really big swing that feels like you're almost swinging in a forest, kind of bringing that concept to life. And then reading swings, again, playing into a lot of that usage occasion of people sitting, reading books, and really leaning into the green space. So thank you. 4 minutes, 15 seconds, something like that. Yeah. All right. Thanks for letting me run long, but just wanted to share some ideas and appreciate the opportunity to be here. All right.
Hello, my name is Erica Block. I'm at 847 Grove Street. One of the big perks when we moved to Glencoe in 2019 was that there was a park at the end of our block, and our kids love it. Even though we have a playground set in our backyard, they never want to play in it because they'd rather walk to Milton Park. I agree with Andy Holton's sentiments about the park. I think we love the tree canopy coverage over there. We love the existing trail. It's a great walking route for people with dogs. We do not have one, but I know many people in our community do, and they are always walking their dogs over there. I think if we could expand the park to include more swing sets. My kids recommended monkey bars, keep the 2 slides. They love the slides there. That would be a wonderful addition to the playground equipment, which would be option 1, to replace the playground with a similar footprint but with new updated equipment. I do notice that there's a lot of families that go there with young children. I would say the primary age using the playground is between newborns with maybe children that are toddlers, and then probably the age caps off around like 9 years old. So I think keeping that existing mini park age feel for the toddlers, there's a lot of caregivers there during the day, which you need to provide, I think, like a resting spot for them to sit, which would be like a playground bench. The family swings used a lot. I think it'd be nice to have some sort of picnic table element as well to be retained in the park. And I think all of Andy's ideas are wonderful, and he is a direct impact because he's right next to the park. So I'm glad he kicked this all off for us as the neighbors in the area. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to come up and kind of provide a comment, and then maybe we can address your question in our discussion.
Thank you. My name is John Howard. I also just live directly across from Milton Park. We live at 868 Greenwood, and a beautiful park. We've lived here for about 15 years now. It's a feature that we go to regularly when our children were smaller. They're teenagers now. But when we have visitors who come to see us or other relatives, that's one of the first places we go with good weather. My question for this group was, could you describe what the passive recreational equipment looks like? Because that's option 2. That was a little unclear to me.
You can address that when we answer questions. to the board.
Yeah, we could address that, but really the idea would be, less of a traditional playground, but still have some sort of feature there that's not like a park bench or something of that
Sure.
nature, but we can go into more detail.
Sure, sure. Okay. And my 2 cents is I think it would be a big loss to lose that playground space. So
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hi, my name is Tom Welch. I live at 321 Hawthorne, which is nowhere near this park, but I do walk up there often enough. And I just wanted to get my 2 cents worth in to see how much I love the woods and the way it's done now. So I was relieved to see A, B, and C as opposed to a D or an E, which had some bigger development involved. So I'm curious as far as the budget goes. The budget obviously is a budget, and based on A, B, or C, it's going to be different, obviously. I assume that would be the most extensive would be the 285. Okay. That's all I got. Thank you.
My name is Allison Latimer. I live at 850 Valley, which is just a couple of blocks away. And my connection to the park is my late husband who died in 2019. We have a bench there. We made a donation to the park district to have a bench in his honor that was money raised by the community, basically, like our family, our friends, but mostly the community. And so that bench and that park is extremely important to my family. That is basically where we go to think about him and remember him. It is basically like our, without sounding morbid, but it's our cemetery. That is where we feel connected to him and close to him and my kids as well. And this is Darren's sister, and we all live in the community. And I was very relieved also to not see a D or an E, that the park is not going to be there anymore. And this is a personal question, but we could, hopefully you can let me know, like, that the bench will be included in whatever A, B, or C, whatever the plan is. My preference would be to have a playground, because even though my kids are teenagers and beyond, kids bring light and energy and life. And so that would be my preference for the park.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to share?
This is also my first meeting and I wasn't sure what the format would be. So this is very stream of conscious approach, but I'm Kristen. I'm at 808 Grove. So we've lived here 3 years. And when we moved in, we had no affinity to Glencoe. We moved from the city, no family here, and, saw the house, and right up the block was this playground. And it's like, we're going to be happy here. Our family's going to do great here. So we have a 10-month-old and a 6-year-old. So perhaps somewhat selfishly, but I do think a multi-age approach to, maintaining the footprint, but replacing it with a playground that's a little bit updated and improved would be wonderful. That can accommodate, families in different ages, and some sort of interactive kind of multi-purpose type of approach. So I really liked the idea. I'm not clear exactly how much of all the green space and playground area can be preserved and considered part of the mini park, but something that makes it distinctive. So, right, Duke Playground, everyone knows because of the railroad train set. Friends Park is mayhem and people come to go to it, and it's very crowded and chaotic, and you take your coffee from hometown and it's the thing. So a distinctive kind of experience at Milton Park that, again, I think the trail, some kind of interactive walking path where there's a scavenger hunt or bridges or ways for, again, older and younger kids to be integrated with nature and have the design of the playground integrated. We really loved how, I think it's the lakefront park that was just redone that we're referring to. It's very integrated kind of within the landscape and the turf design, and it's very clean and, accessible and great for everyone without wood chips and small kids' hands and things like that. So I think the park district's done a wonderful job, and there's a lot we can draw from the existing spaces and, consider and incorporate into Milton. But I do think, while I'm saying multi-age, I do agree with Erica that there's sort of a cap on that. And again, Friends Park and then Duke as well kind of can get overrun by older kids. So it is really nice that there's this precious, smaller kind of contained space right within the neighborhood, that is decently separate from the other playgrounds where, younger kids can really thrive and explore and learn. So I think that's really special. I don't know how free library works, but sticking one of those in there would be super fun. That's a great feature of all the other playgrounds that we have. Also +1 on the zip line. And I do agree with also, again, more kind of picnic tables and seating areas. Again, so it's a family experience where there's that independent opportunity for kids to be playing with families and parents sitting around to picnic, to observe and watch and chat and do those things. So thank you. Also, my son drew up a schematic. So I would like this to be heavily considered. He would like it back, but he did want you to see. It involves a hot tub and a pool and water slides. So he has a different vision, but you know. I mean, maybe there's room for two.
Can I hit?
Hi, I'm Sarah Fedronich. I live at 865 Greenwood, right across from the green space of Milton Park, and we've lived there for 9 years. My 3 kids are older now, but we enjoyed Milton Park. It was one of the reasons we chose to live there, and I've actually met several of the people in the room there or at Milton Park. So I think it's really a place for families, you know, with young children to meet and to create kind of a sense of community and neighborhood. If it were to go away, we really wouldn't have that. Friends Park is kind of such a central meeting place for people from all over, so I feel like that would be sad. And, you know, I love the idea of a similar footprint playground, monkey bars, swings, slides. I think that would be great. My concern with it being a green space would be that since we've lived there, the woods have had poison ivy. And I know the goats address that, but still, I would not let my kids go into the woods because of the amount of poison ivy. So I think that that might, if it did become a green space, I would hope that that would be considered as well as the standing water. And that's it. Thank you.
That's adorable.
Do we have any further comments before we move into the board discussion? Oh, great. Thank you.
I'm Lynn Cherney. I don't have much to say other than I live on Elm Place, which I don't even know if it's in the quarter-mile radius, but I walk through that park every day with my dog, and I have for the many, many years I've lived here. And the beauty of the park to me is that it's green space and a park all in one. Like you don't even see the park half the time. So I would be very supportive of a small park and one that fits nicely from an aesthetic perspective. But to take it away, to me, would be more coyotes roaming in it, which they tend to do certain times of the day. So that would be my vote. And I think there may be some underestimating of terms of who uses the park, because people who live almost at Green Bay and Eastwood use the park, and we do on Elm Place. So it's awesome. Just, it really draws from a pretty large geographic area. Thanks.
Well, if I can answer some of the questions, or Kyle and I answer some of the questions, just for the board to understand and our guest here, we're recommending if we keep the playground, the footprint remain the same. So just where the playground is now, the woods and everything would remain, including our recent clearing out of buckthorn and other invasives and poison ivy. So that would continue. The question was if that is correct. If the board decides just to convert it to natural space, that budget would go down from 285 to 285 is if there is a playground put in there. That would be the construction cost of that playground, not to exceed. The bench would remain in that park no matter what happens. That is a memorial bench. We do not move them. They might be moved around in the park, but we would consult whoever's honored with that. I just want to make that clear. Passive equipment, Kyle, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, President Spain hit on it pretty nicely. Passive equipment would really be anything other than a traditional 2 to 5 or 5 to 12 playground structure. So it could be something like a gazebo. It could be multiple swing benches. It could be games tables, picnic grove areas. Really just still an amenity that people could drop into, use from a recreational standpoint.
Yep.
So a lot of flexibility there, just not a traditional playground.
Another point I'd like to make, if you didn't sign in when you come in, please do. If the board chooses to put in playground equipment, then you would all be invited back to make comments on those. We took a lot of notes. I saw Kyle scribbling too. And great comments. So we'll keep those in mind and pass them on to the architect when we're configuring a space, if the board chooses that. So.
Thank you, Lise. Or sorry, did you have a?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I don't think everybody was here as we were talking about developing other parks. And so if you can go into a little bit about kind of the goal behind the lakefront park, go in a little bit about the goal of Duke Park, and just because I think we were talking about different parks, it'll be helpful for everyone to just understand how we take that into consideration, where
Sure.
Take-If is our most visited park because the children's here, and lakefront with the ocean, with a lake.
Mm-hmm. So when I came about 14 years ago, all the parks look like Milton. They're all stand form. They're exactly the same. Every park was exactly the same. So our goal with our parks and planner then and now is to make each playground unique. So families can choose a different playground and any given night, any weekend. So if you see all the new playgrounds we put in, there is a unique feature in all of them. So Duke obviously has the train, the little splash pad, and the river. Lakefront is more lower to the ground, balls and more play like that.
Disrupt the view of the lake.
Right, exactly. Woodlawn, we're trying to incorporate the canopy of the trees in there. So we wanted to get kids up into those beautiful oaks. And the zip line was also a new addition to that park. Which one? Shelton is our treehouse park.
Yeah.
At the time, Lakefront was our train park. That one will be up for redesign in about a year and a half.
Going through design this.
Going design this year and
Sorry,
replace Friends Park.
Friends Park.
I'm sorry.
Did I say
I
Lakefront?
misspoke there. Yeah,
Friends
I
Park.
misspoke there.
Yes, you meant
Friends
Friends.
Park is community input next year.
Community input next year for Friends Park. So that's 2 years it'll be redesigned. So we'll see what happens with that one at that point. So our point is to try to do different play elements, different age groups throughout the whole system. So anything to add, Kyle?
No, you covered most of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. And I thanks to everybody for your participation in the meeting. We really appreciate having your input. I will say I live in the service area as well. I have a 5 and an 8-year-old, and we walk our dog to the park and enjoy the park as a family. And I heard from your comments that it's nice that it isn't as crazy as Friends Park, and that's one of the reasons why our family is attracted to it as well. So I want to just clarify for this discussion, we're giving direction on whether or not to move forward with A, B, or C. Is that the goal of today's discussion?
Yes. Can you turn it back on and put the slide up?
I probably need
Three
to put my
options.
password in.
And then from here, that would be helpful for determination of the capital projects budget
Correct.
for our budget presentation.
Yeah. So yes, if not tonight, probably by next board meeting, make a decision of what you want to do with that park so that we can add it to the budget. We do have it in the budget right now.
Mhm.
And if we end up not moving forward, that will just roll over to next year. So the plan right now is that money is earmarked in the budget.
It's earmarked as the 285
Correct.
figure.
The
that's-
construction cost, and we also have architect and design fees and potential contingency would be included in what we've budgeted, which is
Okay.
in line with
we'll
what
be
we do with all our
reviewing.
capital projects.
Okay.
Correct. So if we were to make obviously this is first draft budget, approval draft budget will be voted on at the March board meeting. So we'll have the opportunity to adjust the budget based on the discussion tonight.
Okay, so tonight is a consensus, and then we would be agreeing on this in the budget would be the next time we would be
Yeah,
making a vote.
Yeah, yes, we would like that.
We can't vote tonight.
We can't vote tonight,
No, we're not
and you
voting.
don't
Yes.
have to vote.
Right.
You could do a consensus of one of these three options, and that will give us direction to move forward, whether to keep it in the budget, getting alterations in the budget at that time.
And then we'll move forward on plans for the design at a later.
Yes, correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we were
Yes.
clear before we went to the discussion.
This is the slide you want left?
Yep,
up?
that's
Right,
it, that's it.
Um,
Perfect. Thank you.
Can I, before we get in there, because I do love that we have 1, 2, and 3 and not 4, 5, and 6. And I think that's an important element. You had a slide, I think, that talked about the development cost of Lakefront, which was our most recent.
Mhm.
And what was that? Was that,
Can
It
you go
was
back?
I can go back. It was 280.
and that was all in, or was that just construction?
That's good. Those are all
So
construction budgets, yes.
what is the all-in construction, architecture, contingency, design,
So we do,
build?
so A&E will be at 10% of construction costs. So A&E would be 28.5 and then 10% contingency on the entire project. Again, hoping not to spend any of that contingency.
So add 20% to 285.
Yes.
So so talking 330.
343, 350 is what's in the budget right now.
Thank you, John. Okay.
So moving forward, and thanks for kicking us off with your questions. I don't know if we could go around. Bart, do you have any initial thoughts you wanted to share?
I like the park. I like the park a lot. I don't tend to go there that often, but it is so unique. I like the idea of keeping the playground. The other thing I've seen, having been on the board for almost 4 years, is as Lisa and staff look at a park like Lakefront or Duke, you can come up with ideas like, okay, we want a playground, and the creativity level is very high, and they end up with something that appeals to a distinct group of people and keeps drawing them in. So I think the playground with room for creativity is going to come up with something that's would be really appealing to the people in this room.
And Jordan?
I mean, I kind of agree with that, but I think that we should keep it and get something new, creative, but maintain the integrity of the ground, the green space and everything. So I'm all for, I guess, option 1.
Michael, I know you've had thoughts about this park in the past. I'm
have.
curious what they are today.
So I do want to look at you all and just say thank you for coming out tonight. I know for me personally, coming here, I think every other Tuesday for the past X years is hard. So I know coming here on a Tuesday night with families, it's tough. I admire you for speaking about something that is so personal as well. So a big thanks to coming out. For the past 6 years, every time Milton comes up, there's an adjective before it that we call poor Milton. So if any of you have ever been to any of our meetings or looked through our notes, you'll hear us call it poor Milton, because it is a tough park to think about how we want to move forward and how we've wanted to move forward. That is $300,000 or $350,000 for a park that averages 2 to 3 adults a day. So probably 5 to 6 kids a day is a lot of money versus a lakefront or a Friends Park or a Duke Park that tend to have a bigger draw. And that's always been our challenge, because it is an investment. But I will say, having you come today and talk about the history here and how it's impactful, my hunch is that if you look at those numbers, and Aaron, I'm going to ask you to break those down for us. My hunch is that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you probably have onesie twosies. And then, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you probably have like 5s and 6s out there. So it's probably very a weekendish park. There's no way I'm certainly not for option 3. So I think if I'm in this camp, it's somewhere between 1 and 2. And I know it's in the budget, and our budgets are tight. But I'm kind of challenged, because it is a lot of money for a park that's not visited that much. Now, on that other hand, we put a lot of money into Duke, which was not visited. Crescent was not visited anywhere near as much as Duke is today. Crescent is the one that was there. It was the name beforehand. I'm leaning towards option 1 as well. I I think we can do this. I'm struggling a little bit with the price tag of it for what we get back to the community. But my inclination is to lean towards keeping the footprint there. It is a smaller park. It gives people in the neighborhood a walking option, and we're already low on mini parks. So all that is making me lean towards one.
It's a community park.
And it's a
I mean,
community
that's
park.
the thing. It's impactful to a certain community within the community. So
And I overtook
agree
by
with you.
3 minutes, but thank you for listening to
Well,
my.
and you know, as
process.
somebody who's impacted in the community, I've always been it's not poor Milton. Um,
Oh, poor Milton.
advocate on the board. No, I think it's a strong amenity.
Tuesday, Thursday are the most popular days. I would have thought the weekends, Tuesday, Thursday,
Well, I think if it's for younger kids, maybe it's preschoolers who aren't in school.
11 a.m. Exactly when I want to go to a park.
I mean, I think there's potential for this park if it were, updated. We would see better numbers in relation to other parks that have been updated. I do think that, yes, you can still walk over to Friends Park, but you can say that about a lot of our park amenities where you can walk to another. And I think in terms of just kind of hitting the metrics on, number of playgrounds, walkability to parks, removing this would kind of take away from the existing, strong park accessibility that we have. I think, yes, every time you spend money on a park, potentially you're taking money away from something that could be spent elsewhere, right? It's an opportunity cost, but I think it's one that we'll discuss that we can afford. I think it's very impactful to the community. And I think that at least within the neighborhood, there's a strong consensus and it's something that we can do. Did anybody have any, and I trust that the board will be, or the staff will be very creative in terms of the design. Did anyone want to share any additional comments before I know we talk
I
about
would
consensus?
like to, if we are with option one, I would like to see sort of an A and a B of,
We will.
I think while we have this budget for 350, if we can meet the community's needs and build something, because I think I've heard of, some people want some passive in there. If we can look at a 200,000 all in and then a 350,000 all in, two options like that within option one, I think that would be helpful for me, knowing that we're probably going to go with a bigger, better, because we always do. But it'll be interesting just to see what we can do. We have a lot of expenses.
Are there realistic ways to get creative?
Yeah.
But keep costs minimal?
Well, playground is expensive. It's not cheap.
No,
We have to pour all new fittings. We have to take out a lot of that stuff in that area. We'll bring back options. We're not here to design this today. We have a great input from the community. That's what we do in our first meetings always is, okay, what do you envision this? And we got a lot of that feedback back that we can pass on to architects. So we saw some really creative things at conference we recently attended. So we'll see what we can come up with. Our architect, our landscape architect in Upland is very creative. So we'll bring something back and we're heard. We'll bring back a couple options at different price points. Yeah, absolutely. I would like to note that Woodlawn had the same exact discussion how many years ago, whether we should keep that, right? Erin's nodding her head, and Bobby. No one ever goes to that park. It's too close to school. We should get rid of it. Now it's one of our number one parks. So,
I mean, well, but that
and Lincoln and Crescent, same thing. So
Lincoln and Crescent, just to put this out there, had funding from multiple sources that were not necessarily our own, right? We had
but that allowed us to expand the scope. So the splash park wasn't part of the design until that donation came through, right?
We should let these folks know that if somebody would like to,
we always take money.
If I could see it, like I love the name Milton from, but I don't see a problem with naming it. What was your son's name?
We're not shy.
Yeah. We can call it the Maxi Park, and
there you go.
It's only it's only six figures.
Kind of, yeah.
But I mean, we just have to be careful when we're comparing. Duke was not 100% taxpayer funded, which is
right. Exactly. The footprint definitely expanded based on the donations. Right. Absolutely, I agree.
Do we need any more information or any other questions or comments?
So the consensus I hear is we're going with option one. and we will move forward with that planning stages.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate
thank
your
you.
time.
We're going to move on to the budget discussions. You're welcome to stay and, or I see you all getting up.
Most exciting part, the budget. Hey, how are you, man?
Don't take it personally, John.
Really?
Oh, look at, we have two future commissioners back there.
Yeah.
They're gonna stay.
We'll at least have some audience participation.
You guys can move up if you want. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I am freezing again. This room is not cold. I run cold. Are you cold?
All right. Thank you, President Spain. Good evening, board, potential future board members. Excited to be here tonight to present our fiscal 25-26 budget, which hopefully you've all had an opportunity to look at the document that was sent over last week. I know it's a lengthy document, so appreciate you taking the time to read through it. And as you've read through it, I'm sure you've come to realize that it is a very, very strong budget this year. That the district is in a very good position financially, and we're going to talk through some of that information tonight with this presentation. Just wanted to start things off here with the recapping our budget timeline. So the budget really is turning into a year-round process. We really kind of kick things off at the beginning of May, this past May. And that's when we get into our projections and kind of mapping out our timeline and expectations for staff. This is obviously a huge effort by many staff within the district. It's certainly not just the finance department. The rec team does an outstanding job with their budgets and pulling together that information for us. Kyle and his team do a great job anticipating the expenditures for both the Parks Department, the facilities, and also those capital projects. So we kind of work through that in the summer, and that helps us to provide quarterly projection to budget presentations to the board, which we're happy to have provided over this past fiscal year and plan on doing moving forward. Really, the bulk of the work for the finance department starts in the fall and into December and early January, which brings us to this presentation tonight, which is the reading of the discussion of the first draft. At which point we'll be looking for approval of this of an approval draft at the March 18th board meeting. And then in April, we approve the budget and appropriation ordinance, and that's what's going to give us the legal authority to spend money in fiscal year 26. We're allowed to submit that budget and appropriation ordinance with the county through the end of May. So typically we approve that in mid-April, and then we go ahead and submit it about a month and a half early. So the budget serves as our tool, and that's used to manage the day-to-day operations and really ensure fiscal accountability for the district. Whereas appropriations represent the legal limit on spending. So if we exceed our appropriations, it's important to keep in mind that we'll have to go through basically this entire budget process again, where we would have to go through 30-day public inspection and need to have formal approval from the board and submitting that information to the county. So if you're ever wondering the difference between budget and appropriation, that's what it is. So for that reason, it is best practice to maintain some cushion between what is budgeted and what is appropriated. That's important, especially when you think about like the recreation fund, where when we do more programming, that's obviously a great thing, but obviously, as we're doing more programming, taking in more revenue, expenditures are increasing kind of at a similar rate. So we'll want to make sure that we capture enough appropriation room to be able to not have to go back and ask the county, hey, can we spend more money in our recreation fund? So this year we're planning on appropriating around $35.7 million. That compares to 19.1 in the prior year. The main reason for that is obviously the increase in capital spending. We're going to have some significant capital projects this year that will be reflected out of our capital project fund. And we also have a 10.5% increase if we're looking strictly at the operating costs. And that's mainly going to be attributed to an increase in contractual expenses for rec programming, as our rec programming revenue is expected to grow significantly this year. Some of the highlights to speak to, we're budgeting for a 9.55% increase in operating expenditures this year. But if we take out the rec program expenditures, that increase is a little over 4%. Our capital budget is increasing significantly this year, again, due to the referendum projects, most notably the maintenance center and Takeoff Ball Field. Our total operating revenue is budgeted to increase over 13% from the prior year budget, and that's driven by about a 21% increase in our rec programming and also the increase here in our tax levy that was approved back in November. We're still expecting a very strong year for interest income. We're budgeting around $455,000 in operating interest income. That compares to a projection of slightly over $600,000 in this fiscal year. Our capital interest income is going to be at approximately $745,000, and the expectation there is that we're going to issue the bonds shortly after the start of the fiscal year. March 4th is our closing on that bond sale. So we're anticipating holding a good chunk of those bond proceeds for a majority of the fiscal year. Most of the large expenditures will likely take place toward the end of the fiscal year. So we're budgeting for $745,000 in capital fund related interest income. And we used an average interest rate of slightly under 4% in the budget for this upcoming fiscal year. No, there's a lot of numbers on this screen, but the one thing I just kind of want to point out here is the number that we have circled here. So this number, 1,997,758. So when you the top portion here is our corporate fund and recreation fund, and that column represents our budgeted excess revenue over expenditures. So between the corporate fund and the recreation fund, we're expecting to take in $1,997,000 more in revenue than expenditures within those funds. So beyond that, then we are budgeting for some transfers that I'll speak to. But before we get to the transfers, I just want to point out that obviously seems like a very healthy number, $2 million in excess revenue over expenditures. What that doesn't include, though, is the $525,000 that we've historically transferred over to Fund 65. That's our keeping the lights on capital that we essentially need to keep, the facilities in the condition that they need to be in and address those capital projects. So that $525,000 you would really kind of take off of there. I've spoken to the interest income too. So in these two funds, we're budgeting for about $370,000 in interest income. That's obviously great, but I'm sure we can all remember back about 3 years ago, that number was less than $20,000. So while we are enjoying the investment returns, we need to be careful to ensure that that doesn't creep into a reliance in our operating budget. So, in my mind, that interest income is really helping to fund the transfers over to Fund 69, the master plan capital transfers, which I'll speak to in a bit. The other thing I just want to point out too is under that number, the 1,997,000 is all of our other operating funds. So these funds are all funded by the tax levy. And the one I just kind of want to point out is pension retirement fund, the second row under other operating funds. So we're budgeting to spend $355,000 in this fund this year. And that's driven off of what IMRF tells us our contribution rate is going to be for the calendar year. So an actuary determines what that number should be. There's member demographic information, actuarial assumptions. They blend the investment rate returns so we don't get hit hard one year and then we kind of try to smooth out the fluctuations in the market. But I'm just pointing that out because our contribution percentage is 7.82%, which is pretty low compared if you were to look at the past 10 years. That's one of the lowest years. Probably about in the mid 2010s, it was nearly double. So what I'm getting at is if that number were to increase, if the actuary were to say we need to fund that IMRF fund a bit more, that's a direct pull then from that $2 million in order to get that pension retirement fund up to the additional level. So again, while that number looks great, it's something that we still need to approach with caution and just make sure that we're not, again, absorbing that interest income into our operating budget, and just keeping in mind that, whatever extra we are earning this year and benefiting from, we're careful with and transferring over to our Fund 69. Speaking of that transfer, we're proposing to transfer a total of $2,975,000 into our capital project funds. $525,000 of that is that keeping the lights on capital from that goes into Fund 65. And then we're proposing $2,450,000 to go into the master plan capital fund. $1 million of that is coming from our corporate fund, and then $1,450,000 is coming from our recreation fund. So a very significant, sizable transfer. I'll get into the kind of history of what the transfers have been over the past 10 fiscal years in a couple of slides. Any questions on these numbers before I move forward? So there about 75 people participate in the IMRF pension fund at the district. It's all of our grades 1, 2, and 7 employees. So if you work an average of more than 20 hours per week, you're by law you need to be enrolled in a IMRF. So as far as projected ending fund balances go, for the funds based on the current budget, as you can see in the column to the right, all of the funds are expected to meet the minimum thresholds, with the debt service fund being the only exception, which I'll speak to in a few minutes here. But most notably, the corporate and recreation funds are right around 60% combined, 66 for corporate, 59% for the recreation fund. So that's right at 60% when you combine both of them. As far as the other operating funds go, the fund closest to the 25% fund balance is the FICA and Social Security fund, which we're pretty comfortable with as there's pretty limited contingencies encountered in that fund. We do see here that bond and interest, the debt service fund, is down to 6.76%. So after the budget presentation tonight, we're going to be discussing a proposed update to our fund balance policy, which is going to adjust our debt service fund balance from a minimum of 15% down to basically completely depleting the fund balance each year, which was a recommendation from our bond counsel, Chapman Cutler, which again, we'll get into a bit more detail after the budget presentation.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So these fund balances are roughly 60% at the end, as of the audit, right, or at the end of the year. How does it fluctuate throughout the year? Like, let's say between tax receipts, do we kind of rely on the fund balance to avoid some need to cash flow borrow, or is our cash flow pretty consistent and our fund balance consistent over the year? It's
a really good question. And we do not typically have to dip into the fund balance based on cash flow considerations throughout the year. The $2,450,000 that I mentioned is a transfer to Fund 69. That won't take place until July timeframe. So we'll commit it in the audit as committed fund balance, but the transfer doesn't take place until we get our audited numbers. And then the second receipt of our 2024 levy pretty much comes in right around that time. So we have a pretty good idea of what our investable fund balance is, and we have that actually invested in what's allowed under the Illinois Public Funds Investment Act. Primarily, we're laddering CDs. We extended our maturity for CDs out to 2 years, so we're taking advantage of that longer duration. And so that investable base really keeps us within those funds pretty close to where we need to be between the CDs and then what we have in the local government investment pools.
Okay. So good to know. Thank you.
Yep. All right. I mentioned the master plan capital transfer. So again, we're budgeting $2,450,000, $1 million from the corporate fund, $1.45 million from the recreation fund. Last year we transferred $2 million, and this slide's going to provide the history as to what those amounts have been in the past 10 years. So you will see that fiscal 25 and fiscal 26 are really great years, the highest years in the past 10. And think back to the interest income. So this is where, we're saying if we're going to be taking in all this interest income, we don't want to rely on it. We don't want it going into our operating budget. And this is essentially where that extra amount is coming from, is the additional interest income that we have. We will be requesting approval of the commitment of that $2,450,000 at the February 18th board meeting. By definition, in order to commit fund balance, the board needs to take formal action on it per GAAP accounting standards. This next slide here just lists out our top 3 challenges as we enter the new fiscal year, what we feel are our top 3 challenges. We obviously have large-scale capital projects that will be starting and executing those projects. When considering some of the geopolitical and broader macroeconomic conditions, could prove to be challenging, as there's just a certain uncertain environment out there. Day to day, as we're watching the news, we all can see that. Staying at the top in terms of our level of service is always a challenge, with changing demographics, conflicting interests within the community. And then keeping pace with our rapidly increasing demand while staying competitive and working within our footprint. There's really no room to expand facilities or to create more rec programming space for us. So, budgeted operating revenue, and this is having a bit of an issue, it looks like, with the PowerPoint here, but I'll just try to talk through this here. So property taxes are levied at, or property taxes are 35%. Property taxes is that blue, the blue part of the pie here on the graph. Our rec programming is represented by the yellow, and that's about 60% of our revenues. And then that little sliver, that little pink or reddish sliver, that represents the interest income. So that's about 3%. So it's nice to see that up where it needs to be. Yeah. I don't know.
It's okay. We get the.
I might, yeah, because when you.
Yeah, I'm just like an answer without questioning. Yes, we will.
Okay, let me, I could take it out of presentation mode, right? It looks normal out of presentation mode, so it must not like presentation mode. So can I move this over?
Erica, did you touch it?
Okay.
I did.
So Erica fixed it as usual.
Okay. So, yeah. Okay, so I apologize for that, but hopefully everybody's able to see it. Yep. Let's see if
we get
can
it. It's
minimize that. Okay, sorry about that. So this next slide actually, thinking back to that previous slide where I said our rec programming, 60% is covered by that yellow piece, which was our rec programming. So this represents the excess of revenue over expenditures for our rec programs. And, I think the story that this slide really tells here is we're very well diversified when you look at our rec programming. You look at our programs, what we feel are really essential to the community. So programs like summer camp, and kids clubs, school days off, things that, the working families in the community really need. Those are our most significant programs. Those represent, when you include Children's Circle, about 55% of our rec programming revenue. And then to further diversify, you look at the specialty camps. So, Finish Strong Athletics, Game On. You look at Children's Circle, you look at athletics. And then those youth enrichments, those are all pretty well diversified and hovering around 10%. So, as I mentioned, we've had a pretty big bump in our rec programming revenue year over year. If you got into Appendix D of the budget, you'll see that. And again, some of the main drivers there are, Kids Club, which had about a 41% increase in revenue. I mentioned Finish Strong Athletics is a new program for us this year, for which we're budgeting to be about $200,000 in excess revenue over expenditures for fiscal year 26. So I think the rec programming paints a very, very, very good picture, very strong picture. We're not too reliant on our property tax levy. We have a good ratio, 35% property taxes, 60% rec programming. And then when you further drill down into the rec programming, you could see that we're not concentrated on one program. If a specialty camp decides to leave town for whatever reason, it's not really going to put us in too big of a bind. Any questions, comments on this slide?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that the actually have the biggest piece of time, being able to make fun, it starts out that bigger programs to offer or on the scale.
I think there's also some indirect expenses that aren't shown in the budget. So Kids Club, for example, the only direct expenses are the labor expenses and the supplies of the program. White Children's Circle has a lot more like health insurance, G&A, that. So there's a little bit, the story's not fully being told on that. Kids Club obviously is using a significant portion of Weinberg, which it's not paying any of those indirect expenses necessarily, how we account for that.
Bear with me a second here. I'll try to get us back in presenter mode.
Actually, while we're on that, can you remind me when we set the fees, do we have a set margin in mind, or is it more of like a market rate?
It's the next.
That's the next slide.
We'll get
Okay.
into
Oh, sorry.
that with categories of service.
Anticipated my
questions, man.
question.
Good
Because I thought it was going to be the type of service, but I just wasn't.
Well, that fixed the.
Sometimes you just gotta take it down, bring it back up.
Yeah, just didn't like it at first. Okay. So to Carol's point, before we get into the discussion on property taxes and just kind of recapping our recreation programs, subsidies and kind of how all that comes together, we just kind of want to go through our categories of service. As a reminder, we do review this annually. We did review it at the July committee meeting, and that really serves as the foundation for these budgets. So, when you approve this budget, you'll also be approving the categories of service here. So we see the column to the left, which is our fully subsidized programs, parks, playgrounds, the beach, the ice at Weinberg. A lot of the special events that we put on are all covered there. And then we won't talk through each of these, but as we look at some of the other programs, rec programming, kind of where they fall in these buckets. Children's Circle, as you'll recall, we made an adjustment to that policy to cover a portion of indirect expenses rather than a full cost recovery. And that was done, I believe, about a year ago, maybe a little over a year.
So to your question, Carol, it's a combination of categories of service, but we also do look at the prices of our competitors and base it off that.
And then there's some programs that have large capital needs or large indirect expenses. So camp, for example, will target a 50% net margin on it because it's above that 30%. Kids Club is higher than that too because there's program managers' salaries that don't hit that budget but are indirect expenses. So sailing is another example. We'd buy pretty expensive boats and power boats and have the boathouse. So that camp makes a pretty good net margin. But if you were to do a full cost recovery on it, you'd actually see it's more closer to like break even.
Yeah, because I think as a parent, again, not just talking about myself, like if somebody else were to see that, be like, why is my kid in Kids Club subsidizing the rest of the park district? Shouldn't I just be paying for Kids Club? So that's kind of where I'm like, well, I can see how some of these programs are doing well, but as like a government entity or how you set a fee, you kind of want it to be like any sort of increase to be in line with the actual cost.
Right.
Yeah, it's because we don't include all the indirect expenses. So for example, Kids Club and camp, large expenses coming out of the Parks Department, maintenance, cleaning, things like that. Like Bobby said, the Kids Club takes a majority of Weinberg. So a lot of the heat and electricity and building for the upstairs equipment, everything like that has to be accounted to it. So it's wrong to look at that. That's a net profit. It's not. It's that, 40, 40 to 50% is covering all the direct expenses to that program.
Because I guess what I'm trying to understand is just kind of, and I know, John, you did some projections in here and maybe we'll get to it. I'm just trying to understand, yes, we're not as reliant on the tax levy. We have more diverse revenue sources to pull from, which is great. But just in terms of thinking about, revenue growth, to what extent does that also come with cost growth? So I don't want to, get too excited about one revenue source versus the other.
This has been like, from somebody, and I think your world in this professionally is similar to my world. We allocate every single thing to a revenue source, and that's just not what we do here. And I think I'll summarize my 6 years of discussions with you guys on this, is the juice is not worth the squeeze on that. It's a lot of work to build that kind of financial structure that, Sarbanes-Oxley would require it. We're a public entity. I look at this as kind of a heuristic, like a little bit of just a guide. Our camps are profitable, but we're going to invest in this building anyway. So it's hard to say that. And I hear you, because I actually thought about that exactly when I started. I was like, wait a second, why is Kids Club subsidizing this program? And I think it's hard to look at it that way. I think for me, when I see this, I think to myself, do these fall sort of in the right kind of categories? What do we as a park district want to subsidize? Like adult programs. You could not subsidize adult programs at all, but then we won't really have anything for the adults. Like we won't have the pottery for them, and we won't have this, and we want to be that all inclusive. We subsidize so much stuff for the kids. So I kind of look at it as a thumb.
Yeah, but I guess, good points. But to kind of get at it, as our revenues grow, program revenues grow, our expenses are also going to grow with that.
Correct.
So if from your presentation so far, what I've gathered is kind of one of the bonus revenues we've had is the interest revenue, because that hasn't really come with a
Cost.
associated cost.
Correct.
It does now with our bond payments.
Well, yeah.
Right?
So we're hoping with the arbitrage that we
Yeah.
did not budget, we did not
No, I
factor
know.
that in this year. It's too far out to tell anyway, but we're hoping to be pretty much break even between the arbitrage yield.
Yeah, that's good.
So
I think it's helpful. So this will actually help you understand, for every dollar of revenue, we want to make 30% net that goes towards those fixed costs that we don't. So if we take in $1 in camp revenue, 50 cents of that is going to pay contractual expenses, labor expenses, and then the other 50% is going to pay for this building, salaries. And regardless if we take that revenue in or not, we're going to have those fixed costs. So really, this is really helpful for staff to understand that if you add extra revenue, there's net margin. And that's the goal here, is every dollar that's added, there's a net margin that helps those fixed costs and cover those. And that's really kind of the philosophy that we use for our budgeting.
That's really helpful, Bobby, because it's not just that expenditures grow with revenues, it's that some of the expenditures will always be there. So the fact that you can add on to program revenues is a benefit. It's not a 1-for-1 correlation.
The beach and the ice rink are separate from that, but program revenue,
right,
yes.
Right. I'm thinking, just general programs.
Yeah.
And to Michael's point, it is all, from a gap perspective, it's all just put in an individual fund. So
It hurts corporate Michael a lot, and it has for years. And board member Michael is finally kind of coming to it. I do, like, look, if we had unlimited funds, I would absolutely say go hire another finance person and have them crank on this. I just don't think at this point that it's worth it. I think maybe next year, maybe 2 years from now, it may be, and that's a discussion we should have.
Well, it's just former rating agency Carol is always concerned about the future.
Yeah, I know.
So, we all have our things.
Yep.
not required by GAP, but if we were to go down that road, it would be strictly for internal purposes. Just a quick recap on the property tax levy we've kind of talked about. So we're looking at 35% 2.5% this year. And we did levy to capture that maximum 3.4% allowed under the property tax extension limitation law, or PTEL. So we're hoping to capture that levy increase along with any potential new property that will be captured within the levy this year. Not expecting too much from Forest Edge, formerly the Hoover Estate, but we nonetheless have typically captured new property in the levy and hope to do so this fiscal year. Our dollar bill graphic, I think everybody's pretty familiar with now. So we are standing at 7 cents to the dollar of the property tax bill. There's 2 school districts and the village taking up the largest portion here between the.
Can I ask a nerd question? If you were to take that a couple decimal points out, are we increasing or decreasing? I would imagine we are decreasing. I imagine if we were at 7.3 cents last year, I imagine with other taxes going up, schools would be at 7 point.
I think we went from 692 to 715.
Oh, we went up.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for the transparency.
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Still only 7 cents.
Round down.
Right.
Round down.
Exactly. Our budgeted operating expenditures, and now our graph is working, except for that little guy in the corner there next to debt service. But as we look at the category of expenditures for the upcoming budget year, we see that the top 3 here are personnel, contractual, and debt service. Personnel is at 37% compared to 39% in the prior year, and contractual makes up nearly 27%. That's a 2% increase from the prior year. Again, that's driven heavily by the additional rec programming, the Finish Strong athletics that we've alluded to. That is a heavy contractual expense.
Is there any appetite? We increased our fees to GJK last year. Is that right?
We actually are signing a new agreement with them, and we are going up 2%.
2% from
Yep.
25 to 27.
Yeah,
Thank you.
27%. Yeah.
You guys,
We're
one
close.
step ahead as usual.
We're close to finalizing that,
Yep.
hopefully.
It'll be this spring, right?
Yeah.
So the contractual would be like the outside programs? Okay, that's 27% of expenses. This doesn't count the revenue. Okay, so it's just what money's.
This is operating expenditures. Just a reminder here that we discussed the merit pool in January, and 4% merit pool was agreed upon then. And also just a reminder that effective January 1 was the final year of the phased increase to the minimum wage. So we're up to $15 for minimum wage. And, that's important because that's a 7% increase again this year. And that'll result in compression for many of our staff as we're having to bring in folks, with no experience, first job at $15. That obviously puts pressure on some of the positions above that. So just another thing to keep in mind here. Budgeted master plan capital expenditures. Kyle has talked at length regarding these projects, but there we see Milton with the TBD at $343,000. So as I mentioned, it is in the budget for this year. It could easily be removed. It sounds like it won't be. So we'll probably have this included in the approval draft for the March approval. Shelton Racket Courts are funded out of Fund 69, and West Park is going to be funded partially out of the Special Recreation Fund, and then the remainder out of Fund 69. So all of these projects are non-referendum. These are being paid from our residual fund balance in Fund 69, our capital project fund master plan. As far as the referendum projects go, this should look familiar too. Again, this includes A&E, construction, and contingency. This is what we're budgeting out for this fiscal year. Most notably the maintenance center and Takeoff Ball Field. That is the cost of the entire project, which we know is going to push into the next fiscal year. We did budget though for the whole project in this fiscal year, just to have the flexibility if things come together and we're able to get the project done potentially ahead of schedule or get a good chunk of it done just to maintain that flexibility. But there's likely going to be a rollover, or I should say there will be a rollover into fiscal 27's budget as we complete that very large project. Fund 65 capital expenditures. Kyle again spoke to all of these, so I won't get into too much detail on. Nothing really new here, but tab 5 of the budget gets into further detail on operating capital and all of these other projects that were up on these slides. This next slide here provides a kind of a multiple year overview for our capital project funds. So if you again refer to tab 5 appendix A, it'll really have a nice summary of what the capital project fund looks like, what we're projecting out over the next 5 years. The yellow line here representing our revenue, the pinkish line, which comes through as maybe red on the slide here, represents expenditures. And then the blue line represents our fund balance. So you'll see that, this year revenues shade under $20 million. And that's obviously because we're issuing bonds. We're taking in $750,000 in interest income. So that obviously levels off. And in fiscal years 27 through 30, that number is basically represented by what we're projecting will be our transfers from funds from the corporate and recreation fund into Fund 69. So we just used a rolling 10-year average to come up with what we feel that number would be. As we talked about, the interest income has really helped to increase those transfers in the past couple of years. So we used a 10-year average. I think that number is about a shade over $1 million each of those years. We do have some assumptions for interest income. We account for the West Park OSLAD grant coming in also. So that's factored in there. And then obviously the projects that we'll be undertaking are all listed under each fiscal year. As I mentioned, fully budgeted the maintenance center and takeoff ball field in fiscal 26, but that will roll over into fiscal 27, and we'll obviously have a better idea of how much we'll need, not addition, but how much will need to be rolled over for the fiscal 27 year to account for the remainder of that project. Greenhouse obviously being a significant project that we're hoping to finish up this year. And we talked about the other 3 projects that'll be funded from Fund 69. And the thing to point out here is you look at the blue line, that's our fund balance. So at the end of fiscal 29, we'll be done with the referendum projects. And, assuming those projected transfers are what they are, will be a shade over $7 million in our capital project fund balance at the end of fiscal 30, which is, so these projects here are funded. And then as we look out to the next 5-year increment, we'll have 7.3 as a starting point to ensure that we're able to keep up with that capital. And that's a good number. But it's important to keep in mind, we really probably won't issue bonds now till at least 2040. That's when our existing debt service extension base bonds fall off, and then the referendum bonds fall off in 2050. So it's important that we keep up on our capital project fund balance.
If I add up 26 to 30, is my number correctly? Is that $23 million?
No. So this is only the next 5 fiscal years. So there are some projects. I think it's
the numbers on this one are about 22 million.
No, these will be.
What am I? If I'm looking at this 26, you've got 10.5. You got about 12.5 million, right? For 26. 27, you've got about 1.5. So that's 14. 28, you've got at least 3 million. That's 17 million.
Yeah.
9, you've got another 2 million. It's 19 million. And then you've got 4 million and 30. So you're talking $23 million there.
Let me pull up, I have another slide here that might be.
Because that number is higher than what I would have thought it was. I didn't think we were having another 7 million capital expenses over the 15 million, but maybe I'm.
Well, I guess we have West Park.
Yeah, I mean, there's other funds coming in too.
There's also a 10% contingency in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big number. That's my.
The 22 million was the 10 year CIP.
Hard to read, but 5-year number.
Yeah.
We have a lot. Yeah, we have a lot of infrastructure, and that's not new. It's
which is
maintaining what we currently have.
Which is why I struggle, and I know the Milton folks have left, which is why I struggle with, hey, look, if there's If there's 100,000 to be saved in Milton and have a comparable thing, every dime helps. We're not there yet, though.
Yeah, so there were 17 million through fiscal 29 and then 3 million additional in fiscal 30, which would take us to the 20 million. And then
Over.
there are still projects above. The
On the
projects in
heat sheet now,
particular
I don't have access to the P drive from this computer, but on that heat sheet, I think it still shows Watts, ball field, and there's one other item that are not accounted for in that 5-year.
2%.
Oh, the roof, the take if roof. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
We have a
that's,
sinking fund for.
but if it's 19 up for the next 4 years, I recall 30.
Yeah.
If you put it back up, it's another 4 million. So that's where the 23 million is coming from. It's a big number.
Yeah,
That
there's-
1.5 plus 2 is 3.5 plus another 2, so it's 3.8 for fiscal year 2030.
It's
a big number.
taking care of what we have, not new infrastructure, which is important.
Right.
So we've made a commitment for these facilities, so we have to take care of them.
Totally on board
Right.
with it. You are
Yep.
not hearing me say,
Okay.
don't do it. I just want that number to be in our head. This is a lot of capital expenses. My favorite line that Chris always comments on is
Today's OpEx is tomorrow's CapEx.
Yep.
other way around. Today's
Today's
CapEx.
CapEx is tomorrow's OpEx.
Well, I think we might be in the OpEx
Mhm.
because we're maintaining our
Yeah.
infrastructure.
Good.
Exactly.
Lowering our OpEx. I like it.
The sooner you do it, it gets more expensive. The
Yep,
longer you
it
wait.
does. So true.
All right, sorry, John.
No problem. Any other questions, comments on the capital projects multiple year overview? Okay, and again, tab 5, Appendix A will be a good resource there if you want to get into more detail on this. Just a reminder on our fund listing. So our corporate fund is Fund 10, our recreation fund is Fund 25. Within each of those funds, we have departments, which are identified here on this slide. Our non-major funds are listed to the right there. Our bond and interest fund is Fund 40. And then our capital funds are 65, the operating capital, 68, the 2025 bond proceeds, and 69, the Fund 69 master plan capital. Typical GL definition. So as you're reviewing the budget detail, this might be helpful. The first number represents the fund. Second is the department. Third being, which is used mainly in rec programming. That's the department there. And then the fourth set of numbers represents the account number. So 4,000 series would be a revenue, a 5,000 series would be an expenditure. This is what a typical budget detail is going to look like in your budget book. So again, fund is at the top, the department, the program if applicable, which will really only apply to Fund 25. And then the account categories, again, starting with 4s would be revenues, starting with 5 would be expenses. Just going to dive into a little detail on some of the larger departments, starting here with the corporate administration department. So focusing on the last 2 columns here to identify some of our larger variances. So we see tax receipts are budgeted to be higher based on our 3.4% PTEL increase, and also trying to capture all the new property, along with potential recapture that allows districts to increases the levy for districts that lost revenue as a result of property tax assessment appeal refunds in previous years. So that's why, understandably the 3.4 is PTEL, but that's why we're budgeting at a 4.73. Interest income we spoke to will still be significant this year. We're backing off from the fiscal year 25 projection. The feds did hold rates steady most recently, but we are expecting still a downward trajectory now on rates over the course of the next fiscal year. So we're budgeting pretty similar to where we budgeted for in the prior year. And then the transfer out account here represents that $525,000 that we mentioned for the operating fund, Fund 65, along with the additional $1 million that we're transferring to Fund 69. So that was $800,000 in the prior year. So that's the reason for that $200,000 variance there. As far as the general G&A department, so this is really just an in and out. It accounts for the administrative structure of the district, and then those costs are ultimately charged to other funds or departments. So this year we actually see a decrease in expenditures. We're projecting $1,347,000 in expenditures for fiscal 25. We had budgeted $1,434,000. For fiscal 26, we're budgeting 1,387,000. So we're looking at a decrease when comparing budget to budget. Salaries are going to increase in line with the merit pool, along with a bump to the bonus pool, and a contingency built in for compensation survey adjustments. Also included in that number is the insurance buyout. So you see we have actually a decrease in our insurance there, the row 56, going down about 35,000, and that's a favorable health insurance election for us. It means that we're going to be recognizing a little more expense in row 51 there to pay, the employee for that buyout, but we're saving significant in terms of insurance expense. So the buyouts really do help when we get those elections. Significant decrease in contractual, and that's due to the comp plan being now wrapped up. And again, insurance is decreasing due to those favorable open enrollment elections. Park maintenance department is relatively flat, 3,723 net when compared to the prior year budget. And that's the result in net savings that will be realized by turnover in staff, along with the favorable health insurance elections again. And that's being offset by some increases in capital, most notably increase in capital of about $100,000 related to the Shelton Park drainage project. You see the $35,000 there is miscellaneous revenue, and then it comes right out as miscellaneous expense, rows 40, 49 and 59. And that represents the batting cage that is going to be put in at Berlin Field. Overall, the TAKIF admin fund is flat when you factor out the increase to the capital transfer. So you see that it is going down approximately $246,000. But reminder that last year's capital transfer was $1.2 million compared to $1,450,000 this year. So when you factor out that $250,000, this fund is nearly flat too. So while we did budget for an increase in property taxes in line with PTEL here, also included in that tax receipts number is personal property replacement taxes, which actually did decrease this year. So that takes that net down a little below 1%. Interest income we've talked about in corporate admin, again, identical in this department. Salaries here now are nearly flat. And the main factor there is there's a reallocation of salaries to Children's Circle, and that's due to the new programs that we're going to have in place effective September 1, the Penguins and Polar Bears, the two new classrooms. So we've made adjustments to how some of the salaries are being captured between TAKIF admin and Children's Circle. Again, I mentioned the fund transfer out that increase due to the increase in the master plan capital transfer. As far as Children's Circle goes, so program revenue is expected to increase by approximately 20%, which is due to a combination of increased fees and shifts in enrollment. That's about 7%. And then the two new classrooms that I mentioned, Penguins and Polar Bears, is going to be about 13% of that increase. And a reminder, this will be a stub year too for the new programs, as those don't really come into play until September 1 of this year. Total salaries and wages and insurance are all going to increase. So we saw it was flat in TAKIF admin, and now we see a 17.97% increase in Children's Circle. And again, that's because of the reallocation. The two new teachers that we're budgeting for the new classrooms, also a new classroom coordinator. And then obviously the health insurance is increasing in line with the increase in salaries. We'll just note that we did account for a 7% attrition rate here in salaries and wages. So we are trying to factor in the fact that, unfortunately, we are going to lose some folks at the assistant and full-time lead teacher roles. So we've tried to account for that attrition here in the salaries and wages number.
Is that higher rates or?
So it's a combination of both. It's an increase in fees. And then when we have shifts in enrollment, and Bobby could probably speak to this much better, but when there's shifts in enrollment, that does have a favorable, could have a favorable impact on the overall revenue as compared to just what the fee increase was.
All right, you discussed that. Thank you.
Yep. Other corporate and recreation departments, I'm really not going to spend a whole lot of time on. So if you compare where these departments were over the past budget year and what we've projected for this year compared to what we're budgeting for fiscal 26, you'll see there's really not too much of a change. So I'm not going to get into too much detail here. Weinberg with a deficiency in revenue over expenditure of close to 180,000. Beach right around near break even. The boathouse similar to prior years too, and then fitness is right around break even too. As far as our other non-major funds go, just to kind of wrap it up here, we see that most notably the change here, special rec fund is went down slightly, and that's just an adjustment there to the levy, levying a little less there because we're going to have a little less capital expenditures this year. And the bond and interest fund. So we had projected out and budgeted for an approximate $70,000 excess revenue over expenditures. This next year, we're budgeting for a deficiency of over $300,000, and that goes back to depleting the fund balance and the change in fund balance policy that we're going to discuss. But basically what that represents is $390,000 that we're going to essentially roll into our bond issuance to pay for the capitalized interest. Our first interest payment on the bonds is going to be due in December, and that's not going to be funded with tax levy dollars because those dollars don't come in until the next fiscal year on the next levy. So we're using residual fund balance to help fund a portion of that capitalized interest that's due in December of 2025. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or any comments.
John, we didn't, as a group, congratulate the team on the AAA rating. So I just wanted to do that.
Yeah, definitely a joint effort. The board providing excellent financial oversight, Lisa leading the district through so many initiatives, and our fantastic rec programming, and just all around an absolute joint effort and a great thing to see.
Did you have any key takeaways from the process about why we're so wonderful?
Yeah. Well, I think things
It's the board.
Yeah, the board for sure. I think they really looked at our fund balance policy, and they felt that was really important that we maintain that 50% fund balance. That's what they really kind of focused on. Not a whole lot of things in our control, I think, that we can really improve on. We looked at the diversified revenue streams. Obviously, some of our program fees can be fickle. You look at some of the specialty camps. Again, they could potentially be gone tomorrow, but I think we're still well positioned to absorb that and still be able to maintain a very strong fiscal standpoint. So,
is there anything that could keep you up at night about what the biggest risk to the budget is? Is it like personally? I mean, I get concerned about like an economic downturn due to, I don't know, what if there's a trade war or something? I guess don't laugh too hard. But obviously we have a lot of flexibility in terms of what we can cut back on and what we could do. But I'd just like to hear your thoughts on like what are your top areas that you maybe we'll do it two ways, that you're most confident about, happy about with our budget, and where are the risks?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And you look at the levy, and it's a capped revenue source, and it's 35% of our overall revenue. So we know that our operating expenditures are going to increase more than 3.4% this year. That's just the reality of it. So it's PTEL that is, what can definitely keep you up at night, especially if you're approaching that 50% or beyond the 50%. That would not, I don't think that would bode very well for us. On the flip side, Forest Edge is, I think, a really good thing because we are going to be able to inject that property tax base a bit with the development of that subdivision, and that's not really putting a burden on any existing property owners. It's really those folks just paying into the district. So that'll be a nice kick to our operating levy. The rec programming I talked about too. If we have very strong rec programming, and we certainly rely on it to be able to pay some of our fixed costs. And if we were to encounter an economic downturn, honestly, the way I look at it, and I think other members of the administrative team feel the same way, there's a value proposition here at the Park District, and some folks in an economic downturn might think, I'm gonna look at the Park District as kind of a better value for my dollar. I'm not going to spend the extra whatever it is to bus my child to a different community or whatever it might be, or we'll skip the real expensive vacation this year and we'll just do camp and stay local, whatever it might be. So there are threats and concerns always, and we need to be aware of those, but I think this is a fantastic budget, and I think we're very well positioned to take on, those threats.
Sounds like the rating agency agreed. My biggest concern for this year is what's happening in the federal level, the tariffs and things like that, how that could possibly affect our capital projects. Going into buildings more expensive. Will we go back to can't get the materials in a timely fashion to keep us on track for our timeline? Those are the things that I'm more worried about. The same things that happened in COVID, that couldn't get wood, couldn't get chips for air conditioning units. That's a reality. So those are the things that keep me up at night. So we'll be watching that. We're working with our architects. We'll be if there's materials we see it, they have long lead time, we'll try to see if we can do some other kind of material. So Cal and I will be watching. We've already had spoke to our architects about that. So that's what keeps me up at night, things that we can't control on the federal level.
What about demographics?
What
about like demographics of the village? I mean,
am I worried about that?
For like long term, I don't know what the demographics of the village are like. Is it an aging up population? Is it replenishing?
I think I was more worried before COVID that we were aging, and then we saw but there was a lot of young families moving into Glencoe. So while it is aging, the whole United States is aging. I think we're seeing it's not as bad. So
it's more concern of, do we have enough young kids to keep up with programming?
Yep, and we see young families moving in.
District 35 did a demographic analysis every couple of years, and they're seeing around the 1,200 student mark being pretty consistent over the next 10 years. So that's probably a good data point for us to use. When we see that, we're confident we're going to kind of maintain what we have, which is great.
Good question.
Got nothing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. It was a lot of effort. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Good job, John.
You're always good at presenting things in an easy to understand way. We really appreciate
Do
it.
my best with government finance.
He actually, give him some kudos. He did a session at conference the second year in a row, and the feedback I get from other younger professionals that I talked to, they all go to his session because of the way he's able to lay it out in a very, user-friendly way. So kudos to him.
I
And
think it starts with the slide, with a million numbers, red circle.
yeah. Really good at that. So.
Oh, we have to, there's a question if there's consensus to move forward with the budget for the March 18th board meeting. Do we have consensus to move forward?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, for me.
Okay. John, you're up next again. We have the fund balance policy and the paid leave policy for part-time personnel to discuss.
All right, thank you. So a couple policy updates proposed here. So first relates to our fund balance policy. So as I mentioned, our previous fund balance policy was to maintain a fund balance percentage of between 15 and 25% within our debt service fund. Chapman Cutler, who is our bond counsel, kind of reviewed that and recommended, due to potential risks with yield restrictions, they recommended that we pretty much deplete that fund, or we try to get it as close to zero as possible, because really that's revenue that's coming in off of the loss amount from the levy. So the county attempts to collect a little more than what we'll need for our debt service payments, just to make sure that we are able to meet the debt service payments. So as those funds accumulate, there's really not much we can do with them. They don't really serve a great purpose. It's more of a risk to keep them in the debt service fund. So we're going to adjust the fund balance policy to no longer require a minimum threshold of 15% within the debt service fund balance, and really try to get that as close to zero as we possibly can. That's done by just adjusting that loss amount with the county. We'll ask them to hold back a little, and based on historical collections, we'll adjust the levy accordingly. If we even run it to a slight deficit, that's not the end of the world. We could set up a little interfund between our debt service fund and our corporate fund, and that would be perfectly acceptable under GAAP and not have any impact or bearing on our cash flow. So that's how we'll likely approach it, working through the logistics for that for next year. Again, we're fortunate in that we could kind of use up most of that residual fund balance now as part of our debt issuance and apply it to that interest payment due in December. But that's the change to the fund balance policy. Before I move on to the paid leave, any questions on the fund balance policy adjustment? As far as the paid leave policy goes, so the village was able to use their home rule authority to opt us out of the Cook County's paid leave ordinance, which effective January 1 would have required that we provide paid leave to all employees, including lifeguards and seasonal camp staff, which is really going to be tough for a lot of districts to do, and probably not what the intent of that ordinance really is, to be able to provide seasonal folks with time off. So we've made adjustments to that policy based on recommendations from our legal counsel, Ansel Glink. We made a few changes there, and then most notably, we also removed the payout of the paid leave upon termination. We wanted that to align with what our full-time staff have for personal days and floating holidays, which is we encourage you to use them. And same with the paid leave. We want to have these these permanent part-time people that work year-round for us. We really want them to take advantage of the paid leave and not necessarily bank it for termination. So, to help encourage that, we're not really going to pay it out upon termination. We're going to encourage those folks to use that time and refresh themselves and get away from their day-to-day job. So those were the two changes in policy that are in the committee packet tonight.
And just a reminder, even before the paid leave passed, we have already bumped up our paid leave for our permanent part-time year-round. So that does not affect them, just the
correct. No change at all in that.
So I have two questions on this. I don't know.
Go ahead.
What is a grade 2 and grade 6 employee?
A grade 2 employee works more than 20 hours a week, so they're eligible for the IMRF pension. Grade 6 works less than 20 hours per week, and they work year-round.
Got it. And then what was right now we pay out those employees for unused vacation?
For unused paid leave, if an employee were to leave, the way the Cook County would have required that you pay them out upon termination.
What do we do today? Today we pay them out or no?
Yes.
And we're switching that to?
We're no longer paying them out, yes. And that's in line with what we're doing for our personal days, floating holidays.
Do you see that as people are going to delay, like I'll use myself personally, I would delay quitting until I took my vacation, because this way, like if I'm going to quit on Friday, I'm not going to quit Friday. I'm going to quit on Thursday, but I'm going to take Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday as vacation to get paid off. Like I just don't understand the benefit of that.
Yeah. So there's, they're not allowed to use time off once they put in their resignation. And really the benefit is, again, we want to encourage them to use the time. We don't want them to, and certainly there's not going to be as much of a financial burden then if people were to leave and we're not paying them out for it. That's one of the benefits. And then there's a lot.
You will have that financial burden if they delay their retirement, if they delay their resignation. I mean,
I understand that's
like it's a nice thing for companies to do that because you get ahead of it. You're going to pay them out either way.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody thinks the way you do, and not everybody does that.
Okay.
We do pay out for full-time vacation too. It's again, this bucket of paid leave for
small. Okay.
Did you have anything else?
That was it on those two policy updates.
Do we have consensus to move forward on those policies?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Okay.
I'm glad you
Okay,
looked at
great.
it from
Thank
different
you.
angles.
Okay, and then Kyle, you have some updates on the beach improvements.
Yes, so we have 2 memos before the board for design services. One is for the Glencoe Beach Playground and Spray Feature, and the other one is for Glencoe Beach Phases 1 and 2. Both of those are for just design only in this year. So we prioritized the maintenance center ball field greenhouse proposals back in January and in West in order to get a move on that design, knowing that we're looking to tackle construction this year. But seeing as we're getting into February and it'll be turning to spring soon, we want to get these design proposals before the board so we can start to lay out the community input sessions for these very important projects that we expect significant community feedback on. So the memos are laid out very similar to the memos from January for the other projects, where we're comparing against other comparable projects on a percentage basis of construction costs. For the Glencoe Beach Playground and Water Feature, that proposal is from Upland Design Group. As discussed at the November committee meeting, we laid out the architects and engineers we intended to use. Upland provided their proposal. The proposal is in the amount of $68,860, which is 8.3% of construction budget. That falls right in line with the other comparable projects that we've done or neighboring districts have done. White and Company provided the proposals for beach phases 1 and 2 in the amount of $187,500. 7.5% is the percentage of construction budget, which again falls in line with our previous work with White and Company as well as other neighboring districts' typical amounts. Just to clarify on beach phases 1 and 2, beach phase 1 is the boardwalk, sun shelter, and trellis. Beach phase 2 is the Saffron Beach House interior renovations, as well as the boat storage and boating beach renovations. We want to do all the design at once for all these elements because they are all very much intertwined, which is why we're wanting to go through all the community input and all the design in one moment instead of chopping it up. And then even if construction's spent across several years, all the design's done as a cohesive unit. So with that, any questions?
Do you need us to provide consensus? Is this going to be an action item?
Yes, it'll be an action item in February.
Okay.
Correct.
Which is, I guess it is February, but in 2 weeks.
In the board meeting,
Yes,
sorry,
in 2
February board
weeks,
meeting. Yes.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on?
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
Great.
Yeah, we're
Right, well,
planning a long time for community input for other beach projects. We know that will be.
That is
Yeah.
smart.
Yep.
There's a lot of passion.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
That particular area. Okay. I know it's 8:54 p.m. I just want to do 5 minutes in executive session to just go over some process things. Since it's almost 9 p.m., just keep it short, but I just want to, so I have the thing. So we have to adjourn, right? But we don't adjourn the meeting.
No, you're
until-
adjourned to go into executive session. It's just right here. There's your script.
Yeah, you have the script. It's on here, right?
Yep, that's it.
So I know, Bart, you didn't want, I want to just
No,
make
you
sure
can take
that,
5 minutes, it's fine.
that we
Yeah.
can talk about what we need to talk about.
No, those are yours. Yeah, those are yours. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
All right. I recommend a motion to enter into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Do we need a roll call vote on that?
Yes.
Roll call vote, please.
Where's absent? Commissioner Kobe?
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder?
Yes.
Commissioner Spector?
Yes.
President Spain?
Yes.
Who was the, who